Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to discuss how your attitude can radically change multiple times during your entire spiritual journey, throughout the course of your entire life. Not just through any particular moment of awakening or short process of epiphany or anything like that, but fundamental attitude changes over the course of decades, really. And we'll use one of our favorite reality maps, the Kabbalah. I think it's just good, a really good starting point, a really good reference point, moving through the planetary spheres as an analogy for moving upwards in a spiritual ascent, right? And that's really one of the key purposes of the Kabbalah, is a map to help us make sense of our attitude changes as we awaken or develop ourselves as human beings. I guess I'll just jump right in. First, I'll say that our attitudes change a lot, especially when we are purposely engaging in radically and fundamentally changing our consciousness and getting to know how our emotions work, how our mind works, how our bodies work, how our consciousness works, and how to affect these things, either control them or transcend them or whatever it is your goals are. We are in an intentional process and learning experience and experimental experience of fundamentally altering or transforming or getting more in touch with our innermost selves. And so if our attitudes didn't change, it would probably mean we were doing something incorrectly. Attitude changes are to be expected during the spiritual process, during the magical work, the great work, so to speak. And some of these changes can be alarming. Some of them can feel like backsliding when they're not. You know, I think there's a verse in the Tao that says, "The progressive way looks retrograde." There are moments on our journey where we need to sort of confront things that we learned earlier, which I don't want to say are no longer useful, but are just, there's really no way to describe it using words because they sound harsh, but are like beneath us, ideas that are now beneath us. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad, it just means that they served their purpose and there are higher ideals to engage with and embody now. And so these attitude changes can be a difficult thing to get through, which is why I think it's important to talk about it. And of course, most institutions are not equipped to discuss this subject, whether you're dealing with Orthodox religious institutions, the New Age movement, the schools of psychology, or the schools of science. You don't really have much at all to help you through attitude changes, through radical attitude changes, once you get past certain spheres, particularly the Venusian and solar spheres, and I'll get into that. But we all start essentially in the Earth sphere, the kingdom, right down here, where all the spheres come together to create the material world that we all exist in. Many people who are just satisfied with the 3D material world, you know, they'll just be materialists or atheists or whatever you want to call them. And they'll match their vibration, their ideas to that world and remain there for a while. But as soon as they kind of wake up to this idea that there's more to life, there's, you know, they start thinking like, oh, I have a soul, right? That basic spiritual concept of, I'm pretty sure I'm not just a physical body, but there's more going on. Like they think, you know, where do my emotions come from? Where do thoughts come from? What is this? I think there's more here. And that's when you sort of enter in between the lunar sphere and the earth sphere. You're in this astral sphere. We occultists refer to it as the astral realm. The astral realm is the easiest realm for a human being to engage with beyond the earth realm, because it's where we go when we dream at night. It's oftentimes the cause of many, or arguably even most, paranormal encounters. They come from the astral realm. Not all of them, but your basic paranormal encounters like, cryptozoological sightings, UFO and alien encounters, and things of that nature. This sort of transmogrification or temporary appearance of non-human beings, right? These tend to come from the astral world. Of course, they can come from pretty much anywhere, but when a person starts to experience that, not necessarily paranormal phenomena, but starts to get accustomed to the idea of I have a soul, they will probably want to look for more knowledge regarding this. And this is where the first attitude change comes in. And it's generally something like, I'm going to join one of the Orthodox religious traditions. Maybe you start going to church or the synagogue or the mosque or the temple or whatever. You become a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, something like that. And most people become satisfied with that. And the realm of religious institutions kind of just sticks around there. They just kind of say, yeah, you've got a soul and it's immortal and will go somewhere after you die, and just be a good person and you'll be fine. And if the curiosity doesn't extend beyond that, that's where the person will stay for the foreseeable future. They're satisfied with that idea. It tends to satisfy their, people want to sleep at night. People who are starting to wake up spiritually, they want answers. They don't want to be vexed by this question of like, what is my soul? What happens after I die? They have these thoughts that kind of, bother them. They prevent them from working, going to work, prevent them from sleeping, prevent them from relaxing, right? So they just want to have an answer. And as soon as they get a pretty good sounding answer, they'll stay there. And that's pretty much going to keep that person in the astral realm between the earth and the moon. And there are other types of people who will get into like paranormal research or parapsychology, stuff like that, where they study UFO encounters or psychic phenomena, telepathy, trying to make a dice land on a certain number of, a statistically significant number of times, things like that. They start studying paranormal and parapsychological stuff, and they'll butt heads with the scientific materialist establishment, and they'll be satisfied there. They'll be getting their higher psychic fulfillment from these studies, and they'll get real deep into, UFO groups and ghost hunting groups and things like that. And the impulse is the same as with the religious orthodoxy group. They are satisfied and will likely stay there. But as soon as the satisfaction hits and the person wants a little bit more, their imagination is piqued. They start thinking, I think there's something deeper here. A Christian with a more mystical bent will be like, I think there's more than what my priest is telling me or what the scripture is telling me. Or the paranormal researcher will start thinking like, I wonder if these UFOs really are just aliens from space. They might be something more subtle, something less material. And their imagination is now leading them into higher realms. They start imagining that there is something beyond just the astral and the soul and what I'm encountering here. And so the moon is the sphere that these people are then going to enter. And this is kind of the realm of the imagination, really. Again, there are different groups of people who are represented by this sphere. One group that I can relate with are like the inspired musicians and artists, right? They have very lunar, imaginative personalities. They have been clued into the fact in one way or another that there's a lot more to life than what science says, and there's a lot more to life than what the religious institutions say, and such people then need an outlet, right? Just like anybody else, when you start experiencing higher ideas, you need a way to not go crazy, and you need to have an outlet for these things. And art is a very creative, imaginative thing to do that can help you express these inner thoughts and help you get them onto a canvas or into a song or whatever it is. And it's a great way of experiencing the lunar sphere and trying to manifest higher ideas. The lunar sphere is also kind of the sphere where higher spiritual ideas come down into manifestation so that they can enter the earth sphere. It's like the last condenser before a spiritual impulse enters the world. And so, of course, artists and architects and people like that, creative inventors, stuff like that. People love interacting with the lunar sphere because it's really like they're making something into the physical world. They're taking a higher idea and like doing something with it to produce it into this world, and that's a lunar mentality. Parapsychologists and paranormal researchers who start imagining higher things like this don't spend very long in the lunar sphere. Their imagination will force them quickly into the Mercurial sphere for reasons that I'll get to. But the sort of people who know there's more than what science is telling them and are not really vibing with Orthodox religions, the paranormal researchers, their imaginations are intellectually oriented, and that's why they don't last long in the lunar sphere, because the lunar sphere is very like ooey gooey, very feeling based, very nebulous, and researchers who have a scientific or intellectual bent to them don't want to remain long in there, so their capacity to imagine higher things is enough for them to pass through the lunar sphere rather quickly. And how they engage with the lunar manifestation energies or impulses is that they think of new ways to practice paranormal research or to engage with it, and these will generally be very, very unconventional, quote-unquote, unscientific ways of doing it. They will start to think like, well, I don't need to prove that this phenomena exists. I don't care about statistical analyses. I don't care about recording this stuff on a Geiger counter or any other scientific instrument. I don't care if academia ever knows this stuff or not. I don't care about persuading people about this stuff. I don't need to prove it because I know it exists. I've experienced it. I've experienced enough of it to know, and I've experienced enough of it to know that it can't really be quantified, these higher spiritual ideas or these interdimensional ideas or whatever their theory is. They will know that it can't be quantified scientifically, therefore science is useless as we understand it today, and I'm going to just move into other ways of dealing with this, more experiential, first-hand ways of dealing with it, and engage in many different theories, and just be stimulated by having many different theories and immersing myself into this schema. Where do I fit in is how they start to engage with the phenomena now. And so this pushes them out of the astral realm into the lunar realm, and even out of the lunar realm into the mercurial realm. Now you have the religious Orthodox type people who start to see, I think there's more than what the scriptures are telling me, or what the priest is telling me, or whatever it is. And those types of people will split into many different directions when they start thinking this way. Some of them will basically like, a lot of like modern liberal women will turn to things like Wicca, witchcraft, and the New Age, and they're like, oh, the priest is lying to me, and it's because of such and such political reason, or they'll get fixated on some sort of cultural or political reason for it, and choose one of those more like a rebellious path into the lunar realm. And we see that, most of the sort of gateway drugs into the New Age are these sort of feminist lunar cults, like that have to do a lot with like lunar worship, lunar goddess worship, feminism, witchcraft, and like a lot of that idea that the religious orthodoxy is masculine and true spirituality is feminine. And that's an idea that a lot of them use to break free from whatever religious orthodoxy that they had previously subscribed to. This is a personality that will very likely get trapped in the lunar sphere pretty easily and won't transcend any higher than that, because the feelings of transcendence they get come either from the Mercurial or the Venusian sphere, which are the two next higher spheres above the lunar sphere. As you can see, the lunar sphere, and then the Mercurial sphere, and then the Venus sphere. So these are the two spheres that kind of feed into the lunar sphere. So if like a Wiccan gets any transcendent feeling or stuff, it's going to come from either a feminine sphere, Venus, or the androgynous sphere of Mercury. So there's far more feminine energy than masculine energy coming in to the lunar sphere at that point. Venus is 100% feminine. Mercury is like 51% masculine, 49% feminine. So there's like 149%, it's like 74.5% feminine energy coming in to the lunar sphere. So a lot of people who get transcendent feeling during their lunar phase is going to have mostly feminine spiritual impulses coming into them. And that's why a lot of New Agers believe that like feminine gentleness and passivity and passiveness and pacifism and things like that are spiritual. Or that's the way a spiritual person should behave, because those are the next higher spheres that they're tapping into, and they might not have the spiritual capacity to tap into the even higher spheres beyond that. And that's one reason why people get trapped in the lunar sphere within like these more rebellious or anti-Christian or anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish or anti-Hindu, anti-Buddhist movements, because it satisfies an ego desire to just be anti-male or anti-masculine. And it's seductive, it's political, it's, it's ego stroking, it just makes people feel good about being born into a woman's body and things like that, and they're satisfied with it. And that's the type of personality who can easily get trapped in the lunar sphere and not ascend any higher than that. But then there are people who really stick to it. If they stick to these New Age and Wiccan and other more sort of lunar belief systems and realize that they don't really work, they don't really have any magical effects, they don't really have any transformative effects, they're not really affecting or expanding your consciousness, they're not having any material effects in the physical world, they're not helping you control your emotions, they're not helping you become master of your thoughts. People who wake up to that fact realize that these practices are worthless, essentially, and they will start imagining higher things and be drawn into the Mercurial and Venusian spheres. And they'll continue their journey. Then there's the other people who they do jive with the religious orthodoxy, just not that much, or they want to get deeper into it. And then this is, if you're a Muslim, you become like a Sufi and enter the Mercurial sphere. If you're a Christian, you become a Christian mystic and enter into the Mercurial sphere, which is why Mercury was like the god of the alchemists in the late medieval or Renaissance period. You always see the planetary symbol for Mercury, or the monad, which was heavily inspired by the Mercurial impulses, and Mercury just being the thing that brings you to higher worlds. That whole philosophical concept that was very popular was basically Christian mystics realizing there's more here. There's more than meets the eye, and we can really transform our consciousness through like internal alchemy. And this was a very Mercurial idea of like seeking knowledge, right? And so every Orthodox tradition has its more deep esoteric tradition to go along with it. So, the Christians might have like the Rosicrucians or the alchemists. The Muslims have their Sufis. The Jewish tradition has its more Kabbalistic or mystical Jewish traditions. The Buddhists have a bunch of more esoteric streams that go on with it. The Hindus will then get into the more yogic stuff and so on, like the actual disciplines that help you transform your consciousness. And these are Mercurial ideas, this idea of seeking knowledge, deeper knowledge, getting theoretical, intellectual understanding of higher spiritual things, and not just feeling them, but knowing them. Mercury is very much characterized by technical know-how. This is a point where a person might become interested in things like Atlantis, or advanced lost civilizations, or seeing the historical record in different ways, seeing that maybe time and progress is not linear, but instead cyclical, that perhaps, civilizations are more like living organisms that live, grow, decay, and die like any other organism. And you start having alternate theories, thinking like maybe we human beings have been advanced before, maybe these ancient monuments, the pyramids, and other megalithic structures were built by highly advanced humans, or a lot of people like to believe they were built by aliens, that humans weren't capable. You start getting into these alternate theories, and this is very Mercurial. And Mercury is also characterized by trickery and deception, because intellection can well, what's the saying? Like, a really intellectual person can believe lies because they're really good at convincing themselves that it's true, which is why some of the most highly educated people believe in absolute nonsense. Like, you know, there are people who have like several doctorates who are among the dumbest people I've ever met because they've convinced themselves that something false is true because they're so damn smart that they're able to essentially brainwash themselves or delude themselves. This is a very Mercurial thing. It's if you get trapped in the sort of ancient alien hypothesis, if you're like a paranormal researcher, that type who moved beyond the lunar sphere into the Mercurial sphere, and you're still stuck in the linear historical program that progress is linear, not cyclical, then therefore humans could not have built things like Machu Picchu or Puma Punku or the Great Pyramids or what have you, that we were not capable of it because we can't do it today, therefore we couldn't do it back then, therefore aliens must have built them. That's going to trap you in the Mercurial sphere. That's like a trick. That's an illusion. That's one of the illusions that can trap a person who gets there. Another illusion is like becoming obsessed with technology, transhumanism and things like that. That'll trap you in the Mercurial sphere, thinking you can use the mineral kingdom to transcend the tree of life, right? Putting copper and silicon and quartz crystals and whatever to create processors and computer technologies and machinery and stuff, and utilizing that to gain spiritual insight or spiritual power. You know, if I want telepathy, I can either use a cell phone, which is just a conglomeration of minerals, and communicate with someone wirelessly, and that's like telepathy. Maybe in the future I can plug that into my brain somehow and communicate with someone like that, instead of actually developing telepathy or trying to see into the future with some chronovisor device that scientists will invent or something like that, and trying to climb the tree of life through technological or mineral kingdom devices or methods is very Mercurial, and that is something that will trap you in the Mercurial sphere. So, you know, people who want to like upload their consciousness or upload their souls into a computer to live forever, they think they're going to gain knowledge or a spiritual ascent by eliminating the biological limitations that they have and thinking that the mineral composition of a machine is superior to the mineral composition of a human body. Another attitude change that is, in fact, in my opinion, a deception and a trap. The way out for like a paranormal researcher or paranormal investigator is by remaining as open-minded as possible during the Mercurial phase, is making sure you don't formulate beliefs, that your beliefs are not strong if you have them, that any theories you come up with are not going to be overbearing or theories that you become attached to or want to prove. You use theories as kind of just like thinking exercises, tools to help you walk the path, so you feel like you have some type of guide for some period of time, but as soon as the theory exhausts itself and is no longer true or no longer useful, you can easily, and without emotion, get rid of it, discard it, and develop new ideas. That's the kind of mentality you want to have to get through the Mercury sphere. The Mercury sphere is really where beliefs are formulated, where dogma is formulated, where intellection becomes crystallized into behavior. And this is like the sphere where scriptures are written. Like, you know, a saint who's writing a holy book is going to be deeply tapping into Mercury, this sphere of communication and writing and getting ideas down on paper. The writing of scriptures and spiritual poetry and magical grimoires and occult literature and all that stuff comes from the Mercurial sphere, and this is like saints and occultists and magicians and prophets trying to communicate and make sense of their spiritual experiences. And because they're just using the method of communication and writing, it's heavily influenced by the Mercurial sphere. And when that book is then read by somebody else, not the person who wrote it, but another person, the Mercurial delusion and illusion can very easily come through this book and into that person's mind and trap a person in the Mercurial sphere. You know, there's really no way for a person to truly understand what that writer was really trying to get across. Unless, of course, you have a really highly developed sense of psychometry or telepathy or something like that and can really put yourself in their shoes, which is extraordinarily rare for anyone to be able to do that. So arming yourself with this idea that I'm not going to become attached to any beliefs. If I can, I won't even formulate beliefs. I'll just follow where the clues lead. I'll research where I'm led to research. I'll experience what I'm experiencing, and I'm not going to formulate beliefs about it. I'll digest it. I'll think about it. I'll contemplate it. I'll meditate on it. I'll use it if it's useful. I'll discard it if I don't. If you find yourself becoming really emotionally attached to a certain opinion, a certain theory, a certain belief, that's hopefully you can develop the self-awareness to forgo that. And that sort of self-awareness comes from the solar sphere, which we'll get to. The solar sphere does feed into the Mercurial sphere directly. So using solar self-awareness can keep you from developing beliefs and opinions. Religious orthodoxy type who get into the more, who maybe got into the mystical stuff, they became sort of the Christian alchemists or the Islamic Sufis or whatever. Their practices themselves, the things that they think about, will kind of automatically pull them into the Mercurial sphere because it develops the capacity to think and theorize more clearly about spiritual phenomena and spiritual concepts. So they automatically develop themselves into the Mercurial sphere. And this is a trap where the commentators on religious ideas or on scriptures can fall into. People like Origen and Anaxagoras and Rumi, the poet, anybody who then, these mystics who gain higher consciousness start to try and write about it and make sense of it, and they can really intellectualize their mystical experiences. So they realize that a lot of their firsthand experiences that they're having contradict the orthodoxy that they belong to. And often these people still belong to those orthodoxies. And so they come into a challenge here where they have to write ideas that are in direct contradistinction to the mainstream religious orthodoxy, and this can get them into cultural or political or social trouble. And so they use the Mercurial sphere to kind of talk around it or encode what they're saying through symbols and double lines or what have you. And so their books are also very hard to penetrate because they are steeped in secrecy. And they are kind of on their own in this spiritual journey now, because they are attached to an orthodox tradition, a generally mainstream tradition, a widely accepted social and cultural and political phenomenon, and they can be financially, culturally, politically, socially punished or ostracized for simply contradicting it. And so these types of people then generally become more reclusive. They engage in society quite a lot less. They may desire a more low-key job where they don't have to interact with many people. They tend to be loners at this point. They tend to not really care for the things that everybody else is interested in and want to divide themselves off. This is a place where many spiritual practitioners eventually find themselves. The desire to be alone or separate from is kind of part of this. It's like realizing, intellectually, theoretically realizing the things I'm coming to understand and the things I experience are not widely accepted, at least not in this world, at least not right now. So I have a desire to be other than what is widely accepted, but I can't do it publicly. It's not going to work out. And that attitude change can lead, obviously, to things like loneliness and depression, overthinking, and things like that. Again, this is both a trap and the way out for these types of people. It can be a trap because while you're in the sphere of Mercury, it's a more intellectual, less emotional sphere, and this is where you can get addicted to negative emotions. You like the fact that you are outcast or made a pariah. You like the fact that you're like non-social and separate. You like the fact that you're depressed. It kind of makes your life interesting. It makes you feel like a victim or a martyr or some type of special chosen person, something like that. And so you won't want to transcend your depression. You won't want to control your sadness or anger or whatever emotion you're feeling, because it makes you special. It's a good ego stroke. It makes you feel individual. It makes you feel different and interesting. And you'll get stuck where you are. You're not going to progress if you become addicted to negative emotions and want to preserve your negative emotions, continue feeling them, so that your ego has some type of identity. As I am a very smart Mercurial person, and I like it. It's fun for me to be this way, kind of a thing. Like emo kids, they love being sad because it's edgy and it gives them an identity. But it's also the way out for those who don't want to get addicted to these emotions. You start thinking about your emotions now, and how to control them, and what they are. And this is what pull you into both the Venusian and solar spheres, trying to understand and control your emotions so that you don't get stunted on your spiritual path. So the solar self-awareness that I'll get into is going to help you realize that, and then the Venusian ability to understand and deal with emotions is what's going to pull you into the Venusian sphere. This same kind of mentality is also with the type of New Age thinkers that got into the lunar sphere, who are ready to transcend, the ones who think like, okay, these sort of New Age and Wiccan practices have actually no real efficacy whatsoever. They're all just like made up nonsense from the 1970s or even the 1870s. And it's just not working for me. They have the same kind of idea or feeling as the people who are breaking free from the Orthodoxy, because the New Age movements and the feminine side of the New Age movements are just as rigid and dogmatic as any religious institution. They're becoming their own sort of religious orthodoxy, and they have their own dogmas and codices and ways of, they have their own expected behavior, expected outcomes, expected social interactions. And if you break these, you will be ostracized. And again, you can be financially, socially, politically, and culturally ostracized or punished for believing differently than what most New Agers believe, or what the witch coven you joined believes. They want you to have certain political beliefs. They want you to have certain behavioral traits. They want you to perform certain actions. They want you to be a certain way in society, just like any religious institution. And when you realize, like, this isn't for me, you're going to, again, want to become more reclusive. You're going to break free. You're going to keep your new ideas to yourself because you know they're not going to be accepted. You're going to cut ties with these people and so on. It's the same process as a person leaving a religious orthodoxy. Same attitude changes. So that's where those two groups of people begin to then merge in the Mercurial sphere. And this is why in more heady spiritual groups or discussion groups or friend circles or whatever, you have people who left the church and left the New Age kind of coming together and discussing why. And this is a very Mercurial state to be in. And the same thing will happen to these people with realizing their emotionality. They either get addicted to the negative emotions and stay where they are in the Mercurial sphere and can get lost into like obsessions with technology, or just being just a loner or othered from society, just remaining as other, not allowing a higher identity to form, and just kind of being a nebulous intellectual mess and staying in the Mercurial androgynous sphere where there's no solidity in self-knowledge. It can be anything, because again, it's a sphere where if you want to get out of it, you can't have any firm beliefs or theories, which also means you can't really have a firm identity yet. No identity has firmly crystallized. And this is why a lot of people who have left the New Age enter into strange identity politics, where anything goes and nothing matters. You can be anything you want at any time you want. You can constantly change your identity, and identity is meaningless and blah, blah, blah. You just become like this nebulous, almost non-human. You start thinking about transhumanism and cyborgism, or, there's 758 genders or whatever all that stuff is, and you just get lost in this swirl of delusion and craziness and are trying to formulate an identity there. But the Mercurial sphere is not a sphere where you can formulate an identity. It's not a sphere where identities are formed. That's not what it's there for. The Mercurial sphere is there to show you things are not what they seem. There's a lot to know about reality. That's pretty much its only purpose, is like there's a whole universe of knowledge. There's a whole reality out there that you're unaware of, and you got to start to find your direction. And it can't really give you a direction, the sphere of Mercury. The direction comes from the solar sphere, which we'll get to. But when you realize this and you don't want to get trapped in there, if you have enough self-awareness, you're not enthralled by technology or transhumanism or any of that stuff. You realize, no, I need more spiritual transformation here. You'll get moved into the sphere of Venus, which is about emotional self-awareness. It's about like relaxing and taking a rest from this, what's probably been at least several years of spiritual journey, probably more than that. Perhaps a couple of decades of a spiritual journey to get to this point, where now Venus allows you, it's like a pit stop initially, which can be very nice. And this is when people can become very, very chill. This is where you get sort of the chill spiritual people who are just, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, and the world is my family, and universal oneness, and it's all good, man, and it's all about the journey, not the destination, man, and everything is love, and God is love, and all that sort of stuff. That's a very Venusian place to be. And so there are many people who stop their journey here because it's quite comfortable. It's a nice rest stop, and Venus will let you live in her house as long as you want. The refrigerator's always open and always full. Then there's plenty of cushions to lie down on, and there's no judgment, and it's all gravy. You get that nurturing feeling, that nurturing motherly feeling from Venus, and most people who are spiritual practitioners in the modern world, who get past the lunar and Mercury phases, stop in the Venusian phase. They kind of just kick it there. This is where the so-called ascended masters come from, that the New Age is obsessed with, all the trance channelers and auto-writers who are working with the so-called ascended masters, sort of Pleiadian beings. This is that vibe. This is where the Pleiadians live. If you remember, in the 1950s and 60s, these space beings, space brothers as they were called, came to contactees, psychically sensitive individuals or politically important individuals. They look just like normal human beings, and they said that they're from Venus. They said that they're aliens from Venus, and people believed them, that these are like actual flesh and blood aliens from Venus. And then when we sent a probe to Venus in the 70s, we realized, ain't nobody living in this toxic whirlwind screaming hellscape. Then suddenly these Venusians, these entities coming in balls of light and metallic, cigar-shaped spacecraft, started saying that they were now from the Pleiades. Very convenient, because we can't send a probe to the Pleiades. Saying that they're from Venus is like saying they are representatives of the Venusian impulse. The things they were saying was like, world peace, love each other, don't nuke each other, don't be assholes, just chill out. That's kind of what these entities like Valiant Thor and these other Venusians were trying to get across. It was like this whole, oh, you're all one, you're one with each other, you're one with the cosmos. Every time you test a nuke, you're ripping a hole into the spiritual dimensions, and it's just chaos for everyone. So don't do it. Everything's supposed to be a harmonious whole. So that harmonious wholeness, holiness, is a very Venusian idea. And it's a very mystical idea, and this is the trap of mysticism that people can get stuck in. When your personality dissolves into oneness, you can want to just stop there, and you lose your individuality. It feels like a very high place to be in this cosmic oneness. It feels like a goal. It feels like you reached the purpose of spirituality, this idea that I feel the universal bliss, I feel you are the same as me and I am you, and this has to be the goal, right? So this is why a lot of people stop there and just hang out with the ascended masters, do their trance channeling, are happy with that level of the New Age movement that gets to that point, the more pure and beneficial side of the New Age movement that's very Venusian. The other groups that get into there will, the paranormal researchers who pass through Mercury, they learn how to control their emotions in Venus. This is a group that has realized, the scientific establishment is missing a key ingredient. I need to focus on what consciousness is. The scientific establishment is using their consciousness. These scientists are using their five senses pointed outward to look at the world and try to come to terms with the world. But we don't really know what our consciousness is. So how can I use my consciousness and my five senses to understand the world if I don't even understand what my consciousness is? So I need to understand what that is. And in order to have a clear view of that, I need to first control my emotions so that they don't cloud this pursuit. They don't cloud this investigation that I'm going to then do on myself. So they enter the Venusian sphere. They start to realize that, okay, my consciousness is connected to this outer world. The inner and the outer isn't really that different. And now that the energies of Venus have helped me to look at my emotions and control them, I've allowed to go a little bit deeper to see, oh, I'm connected to the outer world. So when a scientist tries to isolate himself from his experiment to have pure controls and pure variables in a pure experiment that he's completely detached from, this is actually impossible. A scientist cannot separate himself from his observations. It's a logical fallacy and an impossibility, because I can see that my consciousness my inner subjective consciousness is reflected in and directly connected to the outer external world. And there's the subject and the object and the process of the interaction between the subject and the object. These seem like three distinct things. They're actually one thing. And you realize that in the Venusian sphere. This is why some people start to feel the cosmic oneness. The paranormal researcher starts to feel the oneness of his consciousness. The Orthodox mystics who have gone through this then begin to feel their oneness with their prophet, their Messiah, the founder of their religion, whoever that was. Krishna, Jesus, Muhammad, whomever. It's kind of the same thing with the paranormal researchers. They control their emotions, their passions, and everything like that. And so the light of the solar sphere is now able to sort of shine on these types of people. And they want that self-awareness that comes with the solar sphere, like really understanding what consciousness is. And that solar sphere is really like the seat of human consciousness. Now, the sort of New Agers who don't get trapped with the whole, this is good enough, I feel comfortable in this oneness, they yearn again for more transcendence, because they can't, reconcile the oneness they feel with the tragedy and suffering that they see in the world. You know, they just see what happens in the world. They see crime and war and violence and poverty and politics and political corruption and all this stuff. And so like they can say, oh, we're all one, and they start to see these contradictions within the sort of New Age hippie movement. Raising your vibration is all well and good, but it's like a utopian daydream to think that it's going to like solve the world's problems. There's this idea that comes in with that there's more to reality than this concept of cosmic oneness. You know, like what does it really mean? Where does this feeling come from? Why, like, what is this harmony in the whole? What is the whole? When the New Agers say, oh, the universe wants this for you, or the universe gifted that to you, the universe this, it's like they're afraid to use the word God. They say source instead of God. They say the universe instead of God. They come up with all this language because they're like afraid of transcending higher. They're afraid of sounding orthodox or something like that. They're afraid of using language that they think is limiting. But then there's the fearless one who's like, well, what is this universe? Like, the universe is just a collection of atoms and minerals. Like, I'm not going to use that language. That's weird. The universe doesn't want anything. The universe didn't give me anything. Obviously, there's something higher going on here. And they will want that solar self-awareness. They start understanding that consciousness is something other than or they just know there's more to it. They're not going to remain satisfied just wallowing in the bliss of oneness and harmony while, you know, there are wars and poverty and stuff like that. They can't reconcile it. It's no longer enough for them. And so they have to move on from that idea. And between the Venusian sphere and the solar sphere, that process of getting through that is a sort of a death that occurs. It's, you know, a Freudian would call it an ego death. something like that. A New Ager would call it an ego death. What dies is this part of you that cared about a lot of different theories, that cared about beliefs, that cared about making a difference in the world. It's the death of the part of you that was like immature and driven by things, driven by passions, driven by political causes, driven by other types of causes, like, you know, the New Agers who turned to the New Age because of Christianity. You know, the Wiccans who turned Wiccan because of Christianity, or the parapsychologists who turned into parapsychologists because of the scientific establishment. These sort of things that drove them, these were antitheses to something else, that kind of like two north ends of a magnet repelling each other. And they were repelled into the higher sphere to some degree. That part of you dies, the idea that's like repelled by other things. Dies, because the sense of cosmic oneness, especially in the modern world, that the New Agers and hippies love so much, is because they are repelled by the modern world. They're repelled by corruption and war and violence and crime. They don't want to deal with it, so they do like this escapism where they just kind of imagine the oneness and they stop caring about the problems of the world while sort of pretending like they still care. And so that part of you that pretends like it still cares or does still care has to die as well. And getting into that solar sphere it's the center of the tree of life. It's the consciousness, it's the heart of seeing all the other spheres. And when you get into the solar sphere, you can see all the lower spheres and how you passed through them. And you can also see the higher spheres. And while you might not be in them yet, you can kind of see what they're all about. You can see them pretty clearly. It's sort of an omnipotent sphere. And this is where the mystics will sort of merge with their Messiah, their prophet, the one that they like worshipped in the past. They are now like one with it and not worshiping it anymore. So the Christians become one with Christ and so on. You know, the Egyptians become one with Osiris or Horus. You know, the Persians become one with Zoroaster, and the Romans become one with Mithras. They're all these solar deities that act as kind of personal messiahs. You want to be saved, right, from this world. That's why the death occurs, because you want like a messiah to save you from a corrupt, fallen world. And that's really the process of dying, is like accepting that the world is corrupt, and that as an individual, who knows whether or not there's something you can do about it. You might be able to, you might not. And that worry has to die. So you need to be saved from that worry about the corrupt world we live in. And this is why all those messianic entities, deities, are solar deities. You know, in the Greek, we call them logos, the sort of word of God. This is the solar logos. And these are Christ, Krishna, Rama, Tammuz, Zoroaster, all of these, Osiris and Horus and Balder, and to an extent Odin. These are solar entities. Being in the solar sphere, similarly to the Venusian sphere, can feel like an end in and of itself. It can feel like, oh, I made it. This was the goal of spirituality. I can see the whole universe. I sort of have this omniscience now. I can see the spheres. I kind of understand what's going on here. My suffering has come to an end by this Messiah figure that, and this sort of ego death that I had, and now my suffering is over, and this corrupt world that I see is kind of beneath me now, and I merged with my Messiah. I experienced oneness with the Messiah. That feeling, and the sun, it's characterized by feelings of happiness, warmth, brightness and light, expansive consciousness, and that sort of transcendent bliss. And the goal of the Orthodox religion, the goal of the mystic paths, the paranormal researcher who gets here will feel very, very satisfied, like their sort of research comes to a conclusion here. They can see, oh, okay, so these paranormal phenomena could be like all these different things that occur based on all these different conditions, and all these different variables can create paranormal eruptions. All their research kind of comes to a conclusion there. They feel very satisfied with it. Most spiritual practitioners who can get through the Venusian sphere and past the satisfaction they felt there will feel very, very, very well satisfied in the solar sphere. And it does kind of feel like the center of reality because it is able to see even the higher spheres. And so the temptation to transcend into the higher spheres won't be very strong because you can kind of see what they're all about. And you might not really care to enter into them. You might just feel like I have fulfilled my mission as a human being. I've become fully human. Like the solar logos, these solar deities are sort of like the archetypal human being, the sort of perfect human being. And when you get that, it's like, okay, well, what else is there to do, kind of a feeling. Many people stay there because of that reason. Anybody who achieves that. And it's extraordinarily difficult to get into the higher spheres. So, if the Earth, the Moon, Mercury, and Venus, Earth, Moon, Mercury, and Venus are the lower spheres, the Sun is the centrosphere, then Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the two more transcendent spheres are the higher spheres. It's really, really difficult to get into the higher spheres because of all these variables. You might not feel like it's important. You might feel very, very satisfied. You're warm and happy and bright and shiny in the solar sphere. And to create the energetic impulse to bring you into the Martian sphere, the Jupiterian sphere, requires Martian feeling and Jupiterian feeling. And Mars and Jupiter are both extraordinarily masculine powers. They are as masculine can masculine. You don't gently go into these higher spheres the way you do with the lower spheres. The lower spheres are like, ooh, how do I think about this? How do I feel about this? How do I have oneness and love and universality? And it's all very ooey gooey, and it's kind of easy to move into those. Oh, I'm learning more and raising into that way, and oh, I'm feeling more and going into that way. And it's just like a journey of learning and feeling and thinking and self-awareness and development. And it's not all that difficult. There's not much conflict that occurs except for maybe some social and political friction that might cause because you think differently from the mainstream in today's world. But there are traditional civilizations where this was not frictional at all, culturally and politically. In fact, it was passing into these higher spheres was rewarded politically. If you passed into these higher spheres, you could become like a governor or a feudal lord or something like that in a traditional society. Becoming spiritually advanced was seen as a good thing. So generally speaking, traveling through these lower spheres into the solar sphere is generally a good thing, and it's not that difficult. It's only been difficult for the past, couple of thousand years, arguably only the past 500 years. So we think of the spiritual journey as very, very difficult, which it is, but compared to getting out of the solar sphere and into higher spheres, traveling through the lower spheres is difficult in the social, political, cultural, and financial sense. You might have some friction with your life and some difficulties with your material, earthly, financial, and social existence as a human being on the surface of this planet. But getting into the Jupiterian and Martian spheres, you basically have to wage war against the lower spheres. You can't just kind of gently leave the solar sphere and be like, okay, I'm going to start going into Jupiterian energy and Martian energy now and explore those spheres, because the lower spheres, you will have a lot of resistance, not just socially and politically, but spiritually as well, because there is this solar impulse that this is the perfected human being. There are essentially non-human entities that live in the solar sphere, that dwell there. They were never incarnated as humans, and they're, in a way, they can be kind of negative and jealous of human beings because humans have the entire tree of life to explore. Humans are, they were made in the image of God, quote unquote. We have a very special place here where we don't really have a strict spot in the hierarchy, in the cosmic hierarchy. We can go from the bottom to the top and everywhere in between and experience whatever we want in reality, and we can develop ourselves to the utmost Tao, to the absolute. The non-human entities that are born into certain spheres don't have quite as much leeway, and they kind of want you to be satisfied in the solar sphere. They say this is the perfectibility of mankind. This is where Jesus was. This is where Mithras was. This is where Tammuz and Zoroaster were. Like, who are you to think you're better than them? Who are you to say you are meant for higher things than they were? In the social sphere, of course, this comes out as you are Luciferian and arrogant. You think you can achieve the heights. This is Promethean arrogance, according to, the pre-Christian ideas. It's Promethean. Today they call it Luciferian. You're selfish, you're egoic. How dare you think you can go higher than the solar sphere? The comfort you feel in the solar sphere, it can really feel like the most high attainment, because it is kind of the perfectibility of the human being. The human consciousness is there, and to go higher than the solar sphere is to essentially become non-human, is to become suprahuman, and your morality changes. What human beings see as morality, you might start to question. You might start to think, well, that's not immoral. That's not moral. And the thing that you think is immoral, well, that's not immoral. You kind of start to see things a lot differently than the way the vast majority of human beings will see things. And conventional morality won't make much sense to you. And if you want to enter into the Jupiterian sphere, which is characterized by like a kingly autocratic personality, and the Martian sphere, which is a sort of militant, strength-based personality, these two spheres, you kind of experience them a little bit together. You sort of use both of those energies at the same time to break through the solar sphere. Now, arguably, you should enter into the Jupiterian sphere first and then move into the Martian sphere. But to get into the Jupiterian sphere, you have to pull a lot from Mars. And we can see that, they are directly, you have Jupiter and Mars, they do directly feed into the solar sphere. They're directly connected. So it's there. You can experience both those energies simultaneously. You have a combination of things that happen here. You can see that the two paths, the path from the Sun to Jupiter is characterized by the tarot card of the Hermit, and the path to Mars is characterized by the tarot card of Justice. And there's good reason for that. To utilize the sort of kingly attributes of Jupiter, you are going to, again, similar to the Mercurial sphere, be divided off from society. In the Venusian and solar spheres, it's easier to start being social again after your Mercurial phase. Entering into the Venusian and solar spheres makes you personable again. It makes social relations easier again. You can kind of interact with people, remain detached if you want, attached if you want. Everything becomes a little bit more easy in the social sphere. But then to get into the Jupiter sphere, you have to go through another sort of hermitage phase. And that's because, when a person in a traditional society was meant to become a king, they were selected and separated out, usually by some type of occult order, a spiritual order. Might have been within the noble family itself. Many noble families in traditional societies had their own secret spiritual disciplines and knowledge that they only kept within the family. And if this, when one of them was meant to become the next king and succeed on the throne, they would have to be trained in certain spiritual disciplines that were directly tied to political science. I know this is very distasteful for people, but this is why it's so hard to get out of the solar sphere, because it's sort of like a process where it's like, okay, remember everything you learned in the solar sphere and below about oneness and love and universality and peacefulness and pacifism and being a good little boy and good little girl and all that shit. You're going to have to throw most of that out, because you're about to become a king. You're about to have authority over other people. And you're going to have to learn how to punish bad behavior. And this is part of where the Martian energy comes in, this idea of justice. This is how you reconcile the concept of oneness, but with the fact that war and crime exist. Well, you have to punish wrongdoers. You have things to do in this world now, again. You got to the solar sphere where you think you transcended all the lower worlds. And you could have stayed there where you felt that. And if you want to transcend into higher spheres, you actually have to begin interacting with the lowest sphere, the Earth, once again. You now interact with it very strongly from a higher vantage point, and that is actually how you transcend higher into the higher spheres. The highest entities from these higher spheres directly influence the lowest aspects of reality. Now, a good analogy for this is thinking about your physical body, your physiology. For a good example is your digestive system. Think of all the cells and processes that go into digesting food. When you eat something and all the things that happen, you start to salivate, that starts to soften the food, your muscles move it all down into your stomach sends in certain enzymes and chemicals that begin to digest it, and then certain cells then transfer that food into smaller bits and then turn it into some type of usable energy that then moves into your body, and it becomes life force energy. It becomes material to rebuild damaged parts of your body. It becomes material to build out your muscles and your skin and your other organs. Like, think of how complex that process is. Now, you do not have to think about this. You don't think about this process and make it happen when you eat food. It happens automatically because this very low materialistic part of yourself, arguably the lowest aspect of all of reality, your freaking digestive system, is governed by extraordinarily high intelligences that have a lot of knowledge about how this world works. A great deal of knowledge. Just think about respiration and how it takes nitrogen and oxygen from the air and divides it up and turns it into life force energy and all that sort of stuff, and how your brain works, and all these lower material things are extraordinarily complicated and are governed by extremely high, very wise intelligences. You begin to realize that the highest intelligences deal with the lowest matters. And it seems like a contradiction, especially to people who are in the lunar, Venusian, Mercurial, and solar spheres. They like this upward feeling. I want to get away from suffering. I want to get away from negative emotions. I want to get away from the world. I want to detach. I want to be aloof. And they don't want to think about the world. They don't want to think about lower things or politics or anything like that. They're trying to transcend and transcend and transcend. And so when they get to the sun, they feel super transcendent. They're like, oh, I did it. I did it. I'm blissed out, man. Hashtag blissed out. And they're done. But then there's a certain personality type who's like, well, what's in those higher spheres? What's the point of that? They're still up there. Like, what is this suprahuman intelligence that is like governing all of reality? What's happening? And it's like, okay, you're into that. Here's where you become very harsh and very severe and very masculine. You know, Jupiter and Mars are very, very masculine. And the Saturn sphere above that, it's very severe to get to this point, to combat this blissed out feeling you have. You have to get over it. You have to get over this desire to be aloof and transcendent. You have to be ready to deal with the world again. And you have to be ready to put your damn foot down and to have an iron will, again, characterized by Mars. That's where this iron will comes from. Iron is the metal associated with the Martian spirit. And you have to have a strong sense of justice, and you have to have a distance from people. Like kings have a distance from the people they rule, right? They're not really together. It's not like a president who's like a servant of the people and comes from the people and has this closeness and is voted for by the people. A king is not voted for. A king is someone who is spiritually transcendent to the masses of humanity, is kind of separate from, and has a distance between them. Similarly to how a human being has a distance between himself and an animal. And again, it's a very severe way of thinking. This is not that Venusian, the world is my family, we're all one thinking. Now you're going against that idea to get to the higher spheres. You're like, well, there are people who deserve power and people who don't. And people who are very spiritually self-controlled and have transformed their consciousness fundamentally actually do know what's best for humanity. And they deserve to rule, and they have to interact with humanity now. And sometimes a lot of that has to be like training your dog. You know how you train your dog? It's not a nice process. It's one reason why a lot of dog owners hire dog trainers, because they don't have the heart to be harsh with their dog, to push it off the couch or to push it off your bed or to yell at it or to withhold food or to do all those things that you have to do to train your dog. You have to be very, very severe. And you then have to kind of treat people like that. And I know this is why esoteric teachers don't discuss this stuff past the solar sphere. Because, most esoteric teachers, spiritual teachers, gurus, priests, what have you, will fixate on their solar messiah figure and tell you that's the highest ideal, focus on that, either worship that or become one with that. And then they kind of stop there, because to get higher than that is socially unacceptable to most people, or the process is crazy, or it seems crazy to the masses of humanity. And that's another reason why noble families used to have their own spiritual orders that nobody else was part of. It wasn't like a church you could go to. A noble family kept like occult practices to themselves and passed them on only to their children or close relatives, because it had a lot to do with political science. It had a lot to do with separating yourself from the rest of humanity. And it had a lot to dealing with humanity harshly. Like, you have to be dispassionate. If there's a criminal who did something and you know it's true and this criminal actually did this, you have to punish them severely so that the rest of the people can feel safe and have freedom. If you're lenient because you're soft-hearted, then criminals are going to want to get away with stuff. And criminals will get away with stuff, and then your society will begin to fall apart. And if your society begins to fall apart under your rule, you lose your spiritual advancement. Part of transcending the solar sphere is to prove that you can govern not only yourself, but others. You see, getting to the solar sphere is all about self-awareness and governing yourself. And a lot of people feel satisfied with that. And for most people, that's fine. But there's a tiny number of people who then have to prove to the higher powers that you can also govern others, other intelligences and other entities. And this is why Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn are very masculine powers, because it's about exerting your force outwardly. The attitude changes that come along with Jupiterian and Martian feeling is you will no longer believe in things like democracy or liberalism. You will see the degeneracy of capitalism and communism and money thinking. You will begin to be disgusted by bleeding hearts, by misplaced compassion. You will start to have selective compassion. You will start to have compassion for people who you believe deserve it. These are the attitude changes that come with trying to transcend the solar sphere. And this type of attitude transformation is very much frowned upon in today's society because, of course, the political left will see you as a fascist, and you might be. Part of this transcendence is becoming more sympathetic with far-right ideology. Those ideas you realize, those actually sound like pretty good ideas. That's part of the attitude change of transcending the solar sphere. The New Agers are going to hate it because the New Agers love the hippy-dippy liberal shit. Democracy and all that stuff, they're obsessed with it, and they think if you think like a right-winger or a fascist that you must be evil because that's what the post-World War II consensus is, and they can't break free of that, and it goes against their ideas of universal oneness because you start having selective compassion instead of universal compassion. You will have compassion for well-behaved people, and you will be compassionless toward misbehaved people. And you'll start to have this severity that people in the Venusian sphere don't like. They think severity is evil, they think masculinity is evil, they think harshness is evil, and all that sort of stuff. And they will not appreciate your attitude change. And of course, the Orthodox religions will believe you're going too far with something, that you're going beyond the concepts of universal love that the Yahwehistic religions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism teach, and Hinduism and so on. They sort of believe in this universality, and you're going beyond universality. That's why getting into the Jupiterian sphere, you go into a hermit phase where you just don't really discuss your new opinions about politics and humanity openly, because this is where people will think you are really losing it. And you might even think you're losing it because you're, again, the assistance for getting into the Jupiterian sphere, for gaining spiritual authority, for being the king of your own sovereign individuality, that's sort of what Jupiter represents, comes from Mars. That assistance is a very Martian spirit. Mars doesn't give a fuck about the mainstream political beliefs, about political correctness, about the correct ideas, about what is fashionable or what isn't, about what is acceptable and what isn't. Mars only gives a shit about strength and power and seizing it and breaking free from all limitations and helping you to gain your sovereignty. And so you are basically going to go to war with the lower spheres in order to transcend even higher. And it's not an easy spot to get through, and most people will not accept it. In fact, people will villainize and demonize you when you get to this point. It's just important to have truly gone through the other spheres. Because, of course, there are people who think this way, who get into extreme politics or whatever, because they might be trapped all the way down here back in the astral realm. And they imagine, because the astral realm is a realm of delusion, illusion, paranormal encounter, satisfaction of orthodox desires and imaginal desires and things like that. So you can imagine you've went through all the spheres while you never even got into the lunar sphere. You can imagine that you are a self-controlled, emotionally controlled person, that you've had the ego death. You can delude yourself into thinking you've had your spiritual awakening while you're really just trapped in the sublunar astral area. Because maybe you interacted with astral beings who falsely encouraged you or gave you a false idea that you transcended your lower nature. This idea that, yeah, you know all about your emotions, you've controlled them, you've transcended them. Yeah, you've expanded your consciousness. Because you can have lots of paranormal occurrences in the astral sphere that are illusory, that make you think you've had expansive, transformative conscious experiences, or that you've convinced yourself of the belief that you've gone through the intellectual Mercury sphere and the imaginative artistic lunar sphere and the emotional Venusian and cosmic oneness sphere, and you can imagine that you're a spiritually superior person, but you've really just turned to extreme politics because you're like angry and arrogant and things like that, where maybe at that point you really do have that Luciferian arrogance that the Christians are so afraid of. So you need to make sure that you have truly traversed through the spheres, that you have truly conquered yourself, because you will have absolutely no right and no success, no spiritual cosmic right and no success in governing other people if you haven't conquered yourself. But a person like that can certainly be sympathetic towards strong personality types who do have that Jupiterian and Martian energy about them. This is something that the world is going to have to come to terms with, the Western world particularly, is going to have to come to terms with within the next few centuries, because Western civilization collectively has entered its final life cycle of a civilization. And the final life cycle of a civilization is imperium. It's when the civilization expresses itself outwardly. If a civilization starts out as a sort of mystic tribal thing, consolidates into a religious feudalistic thing, breaks down into an era of skepticism and materialism and democracy, money and bureaucracy, and then authority returns in the last life cycle, and spiritual feeling returns, and when authority and spiritual feeling return, the power of money is eliminated, the power of democracy is eliminated, and the culture forms into an empire. Every great culture has done this. We have 24 or 26 great cultures that you can study the history of, and it's like freaking clockwork. And our economic, democratic, bureaucratic phase is coming to a conclusion. It was supposed to come to a conclusion in the last century. We had some heralds of the New Age, if you will, live through the 20th century. They were defeated in a great war. But that feeling is not gone. The culture will express itself in one way or another, and this is why we have to come to terms with the fact that Jupiterian and Martian energies are going to manifest in this final life cycle phase. You have to imagine a man in his 50s is when this final life cycle phase begins, and a man like that has lived a long life, has gone through many spiritual changes and attitude changes, and gets to a point where it's like, okay, you know what? I have some things to pass on to the future, and I'm going to pass them on, whether they like it or not. I have knowledge and wisdom that I know is knowledge and wisdom because I'm older and I know it worked. And this is why empires spread out. And you look at medieval Europe was like the tree that was grown by the seeds that the Romans left behind. For example, the Gauls, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Germanic tribes, and stuff like that. The tribes that allowed themselves to be governed by Rome, who didn't fight Rome, they looked at Rome and said, oh wow, law and order, pretty good spiritual tradition, hot running water, paved streets, safety. Like, yeah, I'm not going to fight. Like, you want me to be a Roman-style governor? Sure. And like these Germanic or European people usually gave up some of their sons who were raised in Rome. When they were of age, they came back to govern the Germanic tribe, and then that became like a Roman colony somewhere in Europe. And they didn't fight Rome. Those Roman colonies in like England, Germany, France, and so on became the great cities of Western civilization after Rome collapsed, right? Like Rome planted its seeds out in the world, which then blossomed into the next great civilization, which was Western civilization. That's the point of the imperial phase, is like a great oak dropping its acorns off, and it's very harsh. It's imperial, and modern people don't like that idea, but it's going to smack you upside the head if you're not on board with this. And it's going to leave you reeling. It's going to leave you confused. Like, you're not going to understand, why is the world doing this? We've made so much progress, and history is linear, and we're supposed to be turning into more democracies throughout the world, and more liberalism, and we're supposed to be colonizing space and just linear progress forever, and we're supposed to be moving toward a divine democratic anarchy. What's happening? Why are we consolidating into this far-right imperium? Because that's how culture works. That's what happens. And it's part of the spiritual process. That's why it happens at the final life cycle phase of a culture, because it's beyond the solar sphere. It takes a long time to get there. And it can happen collectively, and when it does, it's not going to be perfect. There are lots of shadow sides and darkness to it, because it's not like an individual who can just spiritually control themselves. It's like when you have millions of people involved, it's not going to be that clean and nice. It's always rough when a culture enters into its imperium phase. There's always the people who want to remain in the old way of thinking, who want to wage war against the people who are into the new way of thinking, and things like that. And this is, in my reckoning, I put money on it, the next 3 centuries of Western civilization, this is going to happen. That's the main reason why I want to talk about this. It's not only to be able to deal with the attitude changes that you might be going through right now, it's to deal with the larger cultural and political changes that are going to be coming over the next several generations, and to just not be confused about why it's happening. This is just how cultures develop in their life cycles. And you can use things like the Kabbalah or Yggdrasil and the Nordic Tree of Life, or the I Ching and other reality maps like this that apply to this on an individual scale and on a larger social, cultural scale. And I just think it's important that in the next 3 centuries, there's going to be a lot of changes. Those changes began in the 20th century, so we're already feeling what this is like, and so many people are so confused and angry about all of this and why it's happening, and they're so resistant to it happening. And my opinion is, don't get swept up in it. Learn to recognize it. Ride the tiger. Don't fight against it. You'll realize it's beneath you. Like, these conflicts, this stuff, like, it really doesn't matter in the long run. Like, these things, this is how the world works. This is how human culture works. And to lose your head over this stuff is so asinine and pitiful, to be like trapped in the lower spheres of Venusian thinking or whatever, lunar thinking, Mercurial thinking, even solar thinking. It's going to stunt your spiritual growth to care too deeply about how cultures change in the future, how a culture enters its final life cycle, and what a culture does with its final life cycle. You've got to understand that cultures are organisms. They're born, they live, and they die. And they have attitude changes. They don't stay thinking in one way forever and think in these progressive utopian ideas. It's not how this stuff works. And individuals don't do it either. Our ideas change over time. We don't stay in the hippy-dippy cosmic oneness or the mystic state forever. We just don't. Our attitudes will change. And it's fine when they do. I could talk about the higher spheres, but the Saturnian, even more of the Martian, but this video is already pretty long. My conscience is telling me not to go with the Saturnian sphere, because I think the Jupiterian and Martian spheres are probably triggering and frictional enough. If I started talking about the Saturnian sphere, I think I would be deeply misunderstood. I'm probably already being pretty misunderstood. So this is why spiritual teachers never talk about higher than solar ideas or concepts, because they are almost always deeply misunderstood. So I hope this was helpful, useful. I hope it was food for thought, some thing for reflection. Thanks for hanging out with me. I always appreciate it. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.